Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC, Rach Shelkey. How are you doing, Rach?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I am fantastic. I'm so excited for this long-awaited episode.
Our viewers are going to be so ecstatic when they hear what our topic is.
Well, why don't you introduce the topic?
The topic we want to discuss today is players' agenda and principles. A few months ago, we reached out onto social media and asked our listeners what player-facing Powered by the Apocalypse topics they wanted us to talk about. Topic that came up repeatedly in suggestions was player agendas and principles. This really isn't a small topic, and we decided eventually we would come back to it. It's now time to come back to it.
The countdown clock is full, people.
And this episode took a lot of work, so we're really excited to get it out here.
Yes.
Agendas and principles are an important part of an MC's toolkit in Powered by the Apocalypse games. Just to review, the MC's agendas are the MC's end goal for a game. It's how Powered by the Apocalypse games establish what direction they want to go in or how they want to break away from other types of role-playing games. Often this can be seen as embracing a story that develops at the table and the MC not necessarily trying to defeat the players. Principles can be viewed as a means for the MC to fulfill their agenda. We talk about MC principles in more depth back in episode 32, Principles in Genre. So, player agendas and principles. Why should we consider them in the first place if they're usually an MC tool?
Often at the Gauntlet, when we talk about how to run a game together, we talk about tone discussions, or we'll share inspirational stories or movies or TV shows to help everybody get on the same page. There are a bunch of different social contracts on blogs and podcasts to help give the playgroup cues and touchstones for play. Well, player agenda and principles are another way to help communicate how a game should be played. Instead of it being a top-down approach like an MC agenda and principles, we're interested in exploring player agenda and principles. See, the OG Apocalypse world did it for the MC, puts it on the MC's shoulders to communicate play style and tone. PBTA games most often sing when the entire group is collaborating together because the game is a conversation. A set of player-facing agenda and principles are an interesting evolution, and they make a ton of sense. After all, the players do outnumber the MC. Now, to me, a great set of player agenda and principles should be a page that can be printed out and laid on the table for the group to consume as they play. It's a menu that each player can order from, a cheat sheet of expectations, a framework.
To call back to our earlier episode about principles, an MC could use principles to piece together what the designer's intent was for the stories, themes, and complications for the game that was designed, and the space the game is trying to explore. Players are left a little bit on their own to figure out what direction the game wants to go in. Some games feature a short paragraph or a couple of paragraphs that give you starting directions to play the game. I know off the top of my head, Monster Hearts has this, and they encourage the players to read them out when they select their characters, but that's not a tool all games have, which makes the player direction a little bit unclear depending on the game.
Yeah, it can cause problems and miscommunication at the table. Recently, I had a phone call with a good buddy of mine up in Tennessee, Norwood, and he was running Apocalypse World. And one of his players really only cared about attacking threats directly. They were playing a gunlugger. It was only about combat for that player. And if you look at the gunlugger playbook, there is nothing that specifically communicates that as anything other than ideal play.
Before we go reinventing the wheel, it's important to address that there are Powered by the Apocalypse games that do explore the idea of player agendas and principles. We researched a little bit and collected samples from a couple of games that we could think of and discovered each had a varied and unique approach to this concept.
Absolutely. Why don't we kick off with the first one? This is one that you have experience with, Rach. I haven't. I've only seen this on drive-thru. So tell us about The Ward. What's that one about?
The Ward is a Powered by the Apocalypse game that's inspired by TV medical drama. It's by Kevin Petker. It's currently in Ashcan, so it's not a full game. It's got enough parts so you can play a one-shot. It's It's available both on drive-thru and in a physical copy. So the ward includes player agendas, and the agenda that's suggested in the game. The ward includes a player agenda. The suggested agenda is as follows. Play your character like they're a real person. Share your character's secrets freely with other players. Embrace success and failure. It's a very short and sweet take on the concept. The ward is designed for playing, again, TV medical drama. You can see this best reflected in the first part of the agenda. Play your character like they're a real person.
Right.
It drives home that this game is going to be fairly realistic in tone and setting. Sharing character secrets with players is just generally good practice at the table. Wouldn't you agree, Rich?
I would indeed. Funny enough, there was a question of the day on RPG Geek, which is a website forum that I quite like. And there was one about, do you actually allow other players to look at each other's character sheets? Is that a thing that's forbidden at your table? And I'm like, oh man, these people are really, really freaking out over character secrets. And I think getting it all above board and out in the open is primo for Powered by the Apocalypse style play.
Yeah, within my game groups, we don't keep a lot of big secrets. There's a public space in Toronto at one of the universities that we will sometimes hold events at. And there's a Dungeons and Dragons game that happens, it seems like every week. And every once in a while, the GM pulls one of the players back and they go around the corner. And usually we walk by and I'll nudge Rob and Kate and be like, hey, player secrets. That's not something that commonly happens at my table. I don't know about you.
Not anymore. I will say there was other room stuff that went on in my old vampire game, and I cut my teeth playing a second edition D&D game where the player who brought me in told me, he revealed to me how he had an open character sheet and then his real character sheet that he kept at home.
That's amazing.
And true.
So sharing secrets with other players in Powered by the Apocalypse games gives lots of leverage and fuel for connections, especially those PC-NPC triangles that we're driving towards. Embracing success and failure feels like a way to reflect, play to find out what happens, which is a common PC agenda feature. On the player side of that, you're going to be making moves, and there's a good chance that some of those moves are going to fail. Embracing that failure is going to be the most graceful thing that you can do. And embracing success, well, when the spotlight's on you, you better rock it.
Yes, indeed.
The reasoning Kevin gives in the ward for this agenda is to keep the game interesting, although it notes that it won't necessarily make the characters happy. It might make the players happy and content, but your characters, well, if you're going to be embracing failure, they're not always going to have a great day.
That can be a tough transition. My wife came from the world of D&D and World of Darkness. Those have been her favorite games. And playing Powered by the Apocalypse games like Dungeon World, Monster Hearts, Masks, where failure is part of the fun, has been a challenge for her. There are times where if she fails too many times in a row, even though she knows she's making XP in Monster Hearts 2, she's like, my character keeps sucking. And I'm like, no, your character is in more interesting situations.
Oh, it's sometimes hard, too, when failure becomes part of your character. I have one Powered by the Apocalypse character for whom it was a running joke that they could succeed at doing badass things, but only if no one else was watching, because I would always roll a 6-.
I do think it's incumbent upon a smart and clever MC to make sure that the failures are interesting. I think Kate does that in an exemplary fashion. And Mark D.S. Truman is also really good at driving the failure home without making the player character look foolish.
I think that's a great point, because failure's okay. Being made a fool of, that can really hit that bleed between character and player. It can make, in my case, it could make me feel like, well, why am I at the table?
Right. Well, let's talk about another game, Fellowship. Why don't you lead us off on Fellowship?
Fellowship is a game by Jacob Randolph. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game about a band of heroes, played by the players, teaming up to save the world from the Overlord, played by the MC. Fellowship features both player agenda, and principles. So, Rich, you have a lot more experience with Fellowship than I do, I believe.
Yes, I have. I've had the pleasure of playing Kaj Thraka in a Fellowship game that's run by Tyler of the Gauntlet with Patrick, also a Gauntlet member, and James and Jesse, and Lowell and Sherry. It's kind of an all-star group. Over the course of play, we've pushed the agendas of Fellowship, which the Fellowship agendas are as follows. So there are 4 parts of the agenda. 3 are shared across all characters, and then the 4th varies depending on the playbook. The 3 that apply to everyone are: be brave, take risks, tell us of your people, improve the world around you. As I said, the 4th varies depending on the playbook. Each playbook has 3 different options of which the player can pick one. For example, with the Harbinger playbook, you can have tell us about the great prophecies and do your best to fulfill them. Or remove evil from this world at all costs. Or protect your allies from harm and danger no matter what happens to you. And since now I have a chance to mention orcs, I will. The orc playbook, which I chose, the agendas were born rebel, fix the system by any means necessary, capitalism ho, seek a profit no matter the cost, or destroy something beautiful, like elves, bring an end to beautiful or valuable things. I chose capitalism ho, which has been an interesting turn. However, it has not been a significant part of play because we're constantly traversing the continent and heading off into different islands and the like. So when you have a bunch of different mediums of exchange, capitalism takes a bit of a back seat.
Got to set up that supply chain to get things off the islands into the mainland and getting money back into your pockets.
I know, but we've got this flying ship, so I really need to take more advantage of that. So Lowell, watch out. Rach, why don't you talk a little bit about the Fellowship player principles?
All players in Fellowship share the same principles. Be heroic, create solutions, not problems, address the characters, not the players, embrace the fantastic, make a move that follows, remind us of your moves, always ask questions, always answer questions, begin and end with the fiction, don't steal the spotlight, but shine when you have it.
Man, I love those principles. I will tell you, I have adopted a number of those principles in play of other games. For example, in the Monster of the Week game that I run on Sundays for the Intercontinental Group of Awesome, remind us of your moves is a thing that I do at the outset. So I am the MC, but I model this play, and they have often picked it up as well, because one of the players is a mundane, and he gets XP if he goes off by himself and gets in trouble. And so he will remind the players, hey, by the way, you will be incentivized to let me go get in trouble. And then one of the other players is an expert, and she will say, hey, by the way, if you come to me for advice and I give it to you, you're either going to get a +1 or get some XP. So let's hit that. And it's really reinforced the aspects of their characters they're most interested in by reminding us of that. Because there's a lot to remember, right? You got basic moves, you got character moves, and we got custom moves from time to time. So I think that remind us of your moves is one of my favorite of the Fellowship player principles. What are some that you like?
I definitely like always ask questions, always answer questions. It hits on something that took me a while to internalize in gaming, that if someone asks a question of you, it doesn't necessarily mean they're calling you out, saying justify why this is happening. It could be that they've really bought into what you presented and they want to know more because it sounds cool. And the other half is always answer questions, because giving an answer to a question someone has about the setting or your character is always going to be more interesting than obfuscating. I mean, as a GM or the MC shouldn't be obfuscating, nor should you be as the player, because the more information at the table, the more things that are actionable, and the higher chance that you'll have your ideas come into play.
It really is important that even if the player character might be lying, that you as a player have the chance to answer those questions. Because you can make that separation. You can have a little bit of the actor of your character will portray a thing in a certain way. But as a player, you can communicate to the table the truth of a thing. And I think it's going to really enrich the play. Be heroic is a principle that really works within Fellowship. Not necessarily a thing that I would have as a player principle and say, Apocalypse World, right? Heroic is very specific to the style of play in Fellowship. But there are a pair, just like you like the always ask questions, always answer questions, there are a pair here that I love. Don't steal the spotlight, but shine on when you have it. That's a two-parter, and I love that it is two-part because in the Gauntlet, our culture is to be very giving and to share the spotlight, right? I'll often find players who are giving up something that they could have done that was super cool to set someone else up to be successful or to highlight an aspect that is interesting for that character. Almost to the detriment of anyone becoming party leader, right? That was something that was brought up after playing the Black Hack that was run excellently by Richard Dwayne. Is one of the players said, hey, I love that we are working together so well, but every once in a while someone should say, we should do this. But, I'll take that. And that wasn't a full-on complaint as much as a witty comment. The other half of that is, but shine on when you have the spotlight. You don't always have to give up that moment. There are times when everyone's going to look to you as the player. Take stage. Embody it. Meet that aspect of your character that you envisioned when you said, oh man, I want to hit this playbook, or oh wow, this move could lead up to this moment, or that character that the MC created or that we dreamed up together. I really want to have a moment where we explore this. Shine on that spotlight. Don't dominate the game, but when the torch is passed to you, shine it. I love that.
Oh, no, I definitely get it because there are times when I'm playing, when everyone looks to me, that I have this moment of, am I stepping on someone's toes? Could someone else be doing this cool thing? Because I'm about to do the cool thing, and I get really self-conscious and sometimes stall out. So it's good to have that reminder of, no, this is your shtick. You're going to do it now, and you're going to rock it, hopefully. And on a 6-, at least it'll be interesting.
Absolutely. I love that principle gives you permission to step into that spotlight. I think is very well created and is something that I encourage people to take a look at.
Did you have any other thoughts about Fellowship?
No, I think we hit it pretty well. What's next?
So the next game is one that takes a step off of the beaten path of a lot of mainstream Powered by Apocalypse games. It explores different spaces. That game is Dream Askew by Avery Alder. Dream Askew has player principles for each playbook. There's 6 of them. They're a little bit derivative of Apocalypse World playbooks. And I use derivative in the mechanical sense, not in the derogatory sense. And within reason, because this is Avery's Apocalypse World hack. Like, this is Apocalypse World with different mechanics. So Avery discusses in the game that principles are guiding ideas for playing your character. Don't worry about memorizing this list, but do glance at it from time to time and let it influence you. One of the playbooks that's most unique to Dream Askew is The Arrival. I also think it's the most accessible for discussing the player principles. The Arrival is a person who's new to the community. Dream Askew is about a queer community in a growing apocalypse. So the world hasn't quite fully ended yet, but it is ending around you. And the Arrival is someone who came from that outside world that's still clinging on to the queer enclave and is bringing with them their baggage, but also the hope for the future. They're struggling to make a space in this community. The principles are make your character fallible and relatable, look for opportunities to both fit in and stand out, learn about the queer enclave's social rules through trial and error, look for opportunities to hint at your troubled past, occasionally use unwelcome means to achieve necessary ends, and explore themes of resentment and acceptance. That really sums up that concept of the new person in town, at least to me. I love the idea of occasionally using unwelcome means to achieve necessary ends, to show that you're different.
Me too.
I haven't played The Arrival. When I played it the first time, Avery played it and just knocked it out of the park. She hit every point exactly. And the idea of being like, there is something off about you, there's something different. Again, looking for opportunities to both fit in like you belong, but also stand out because you aren't quite one of the rest of the community yet. Have you had a chance to play Dream Askew yet, Rich?
I have as a one-shot, and I found the player principles fascinating. I especially like that the player principles are individual and changed. Like, there are a couple of principles that are relatively consistent for each of the 6 playbooks, but the majority of them are specific and unique to that playbook. And they are so powerful at helping to guide, here's the best way to maximize what this playbook is about. This is what this character type does well. I like principles because they are a nice little, easy to remember bulleted list versus I've seen things like second skins and aspects of Monster Hearts 2 that we'll talk about that will explore those skins, and they do a great job, but it's great to have something that's easy to access and keep with you at the table live.
Yeah, and earlier in the podcast, I referenced Monster Hearts as a game that I feel really sums up what the playbook is about pretty clearly in each playbook. They're surprised it's the same author.
Avery's got it down. One of the newer Powered by the Apocalypse games is, well, you've heard me talk about it a bunch. It's in active playtest. You can download it free right now. It's called Impulse Drive. Impulse Drive is Mass Effect meets Firefly meets Killjoys meets Farscape. It is a space adventure that deals with a crew that does not necessarily the most pleasant kind of jobs. Player agenda: play an interesting, active character. Explore dangerous and exciting worlds. Play to find out what happens. I love that. Player principles: take risks and embrace the consequences, which we heard a little bit about when you talked about the ward. I really like that through line. Learn your archetype's moves. An interesting thing that I haven't seen in any other player principles about, hey, learn the game, know how your character works. Keep track of your foibles and say when they apply. Foibles are an aspect of Impulse Drive where it's like a flaw. If it comes into play, you can basically take a disadvantage, or you roll with disadvantage, which is rolling 3d6 instead of 2d6, and you pick the worst 2 of the 3 dice that you've rolled. So it's, hey, keep track of your own flaws and say when they apply, and then make that decision if you want it to apply or not. Because it can increase your chance of failure, and failure drives experience points in this game. Step up when it's your turn to shine. Step back when it's another player's turn to shine. An interesting version of what we talked about in Fellowship. Phrased a little differently in that it talks about stepping up first and then stepping back when it is another player's turn to shine. I have to say, honestly, I'm a little bit more of a fan of Fellowship's approach. What do you think?
Visually, I love Fellowship's interpretation of that a bit more. I think that the one in Impulse Drive, that step up, step back, might be in connection with the last principle, though.
It is. And that last principle is think cinematically. I love that because it is definitely an aspect of gauntlet play. We talk about framing shots and cuts. I even talk about, we got the crane in so we could get a big high shot. So we definitely think cinematically when we play together.
It definitely also puts me in that mindset of playing big scale science fiction role playing, because when I hear think cinematically, I think of the old West End Games Star Wars role playing game. And that was a big point they loved hitting on, is do whatever you want, just make it look cool, make it feel like something you would see in a movie.
Oh man, I can't believe we just name dropped West End Games D6 Star Wars. I love it. Good job,
I have a problem with that game. I own a lot of books.
As the person who's running Star Wars Saturdays, I will not blame you for having any problems with anything Star Wars related.
You haven't seen my adventure collection, though. I'm still buying them. I think I got a new one at Dreamation. And by new, I mean printed in like 1989.
Wow.
So the final game we want to touch upon is Monster of the Week. This one I overlooked briefly until my partner Rob was talking to me at one point saying, hey, didn't Monster of the Week have a player agenda? And then we flipped through the books, Rich and I together, and then we found the Hunter agenda.
Man, I felt bad because I'm running a Monster of the Week game. I should have known this one right off. Thank you, Rob.
As soon as you mentioned, like, yes, that sounds familiar. So the Hunter agenda is when you're playing your Hunter, act like you're the hero of the story, because you are.
Mm-hmm.
Make your own destiny. Find the damn monsters and stop them. And play your Hunter like they're a real person. These really crystallize that TV cinematic feel of a Monster of the Week type story, which quintessentially Monster of the Week is trying to tell. The idea that you are the hero, own the fact that you're the hero. You're in some ways better than everyone else who's an NPC. Not a better person, but we know that this game is going to be about you. Make your own destiny, drive the story forward, because otherwise bad things are going to happen if you don't intervene. Find the damn monster and stop them. That's the point of this game.
Mm-hmm.
And play your Hunter like they're a real person. So much in the same way of this style of genre television, we really want these characters to be relatable. I mean, that's the reason why that we fall in love with them, and then in some cases write fan fiction about them, post it on the internet. This is what really drives people to stories like Supernatural and stories like The X-Files.
Yeah, I think that it's very finely tuned. And Monster of the Week is one of the early Apocalypse Engine games. The fact that Michael Sands created this and handed it to the players rather than having it just be part and parcel of the MC's work, I really like it.
Again, I really think it gives you, here's 4 ideas to keep in the back of your head. Because games of Monster of the Week that I've run and I've played are really about hitting the ground running. Stuff's on fire, you got to put it out right away.
So now we've talked about a bunch of games that have player agenda and principles. And Rach, I'm excited because we have been inspired. Like, could there be a proto-player agenda and principles out there? Could there be a thing that we could pull from all of these places and our own experiences and posit a player agenda and principles that you could drop in to your own PBTA game?
Well, that was the point of this episode, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Well, I think we can.
Let's start with player agendas. The MC agenda, again, is to look at what the MC is trying to create with the game, what the story is. So let's go way back to Apocalypse World and look at what the MC agenda is. Make Apocalypse World seem real. Make the players' characters' lives not boring. Play to find out what happens. Very straightforward. Make the world real. Have interesting things happen to the characters. Play to find out. Basics of what drives Apocalypse World forward.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the idea of the social contract, the agenda of the player is to support the MC while exploring their own characters and their own story. So this is what we have put together for a potential player agenda. Agenda point number 1, make your character seem real. This echoes the principle established in the word, play your character like they're a real person. By real, we don't mean your character is necessarily a person who could exist in modern society. However, your character should be a complex person with wants and needs who could feel like a real person in their own world. They aren't flat, they are complex. Agenda point number 2, look beyond the status quo. The MC is going to make your lives interesting, but that doesn't mean you should sit back and wait for things to happen around you. Even if you aren't always actively pushing for the world to change, you should at least keep an eye to the horizon. Looking beyond the status quo will also help you spot plot hooks the MC might be laying out. You don't always have to follow every lead. I mean, some of them might not be interesting, but you should be looking for the ones that compel you.
Yeah, I really find this one interesting, Rach. This is the one that you came up with, and we've talked about the phrasing of it. I think look beyond the status quo. I think as an approach, it challenges the player to think not just now, but outside of their own skin. And I like that a great deal. It helps them to keep an eye towards what maybe their advancements would be, or what other things are going on within the world. Looking beyond the status quo forces you as a player to be a little bit of a planner. And I think that's smart. It shouldn't take you out of the immediate action, but it gives you a wider scope. And so I'm really glad you put this one in here.
Yeah, this part of the agenda is the one we had to workshop the most, because Rich brought up a valid point. That is, what happens if you have a player who is constantly pushing at the world and trying to make it break and constantly trying to escalate is this just going to encourage that behavior? I think it should be taken in a way that's your character isn't just going to stay in one spot and hunker down and not do anything. That you always dream one step bigger, have a couple of chess moves planned ahead of time for when things happen. You have stuff you want to look towards and not just accept the status quo around you.
Right, and I think it's also interesting to make sure that your character has an actual agenda of their own. Like there's a reason they exist in the world, things they want to accomplish, and pushing against the world can help them to get there.
Yes, this is something that I believe the current version of Fallen Empires has, where your character has to have a goal in mind, and that's part of character creation is what's your character's long-term goal? What's their dream they want fulfilled? That might be putting it a little bit too romantic for Fallen Empires, so not I think.
And the last of the player agenda is play to find out what happens. I know it's a bit trite to go back to this one, but it's important to keep in mind, not just for the MC, but for you as well. The game is a collective experience. Everyone at the table should keep it in mind as a shared goal. We're here to tell a story, see how the characters grow and develop, and roll dice, sometimes to be presented with unwelcome or unwanted outcomes.
No, definitely. I mean, we're here to tell a story together, right? I don't know what the ending of my character is. I want to know, and it's all about getting there and seeing what happens to the other characters. How are their lives going to fall apart and then get put back together again?
Well, let's transition to player principles.
Player principles are a little bit more tricky. We tried to boil them down into ones that you could port, if you would, from one Powered by the Apocalypse game to another. Some principles on the MC side tend to be very genre-focused. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to episode 32. We knew going in right away that we couldn't fall back onto genre. So we looked at play styles and tricks and ideas that you could keep in mind to help keep things moving. Ways you could go forward when you're not necessarily making moves. The first principle is make your character fallible and relatable.
Make them not perfect. Make us want to be in their corner because we're supposed to be fans of those characters.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you have a character who can't fail at anything, that has no flaws, that's barely a character.
Yeah, don't marry Sue.
Well, unless it's fun. Unless the game supports it.
The second player principle is give your characters something to believe in. That's a principle that flows from playing to find out what happens as well as looking beyond the status quo. Give your character a thing that drives them. A belief in someone, a belief in something, a belief in a culture. There is something that they believe in that will help to motivate and guide their actions. And that's important to have.
It also gives your character something to be sad about when the MC shatters it in front of you.
Exactly.
I mean, if your character doesn't believe in something, then there's no risks anymore. There's nothing that they're willing to stake to push further. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. If they don't believe in something, then you have made a very passive character. You've made an NPC, man.
NPCs even have drives and goals, right?
All right. You've made a terrible NPC. You've made a set piece.
The next principle is remind us of your moves. Very important. There is a lot of information in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and it doesn't hurt to remind people of your moves, especially the ones they can interact with. I know, speaking from personal experience, that it can make me feel a little self-conscious to be like, hey, interact with this move, get your XP, please interact with me. But if you don't mention it, people are going to forget about it because there's so many things going around you at the table.
Right, and don't wait until Roses and Thorns to mention your move. Do it right then. This game is a conversation. And you have a number of tools. If you're playing a hangout game, just pop it into the chat. If you're live at the table, maybe you can just raise your hand to the side. You don't have to jump in if you feel uncomfortable, but hopefully you can advocate for your character. Because here's the deal, those moves make you cool.
That's why we're here.
The fourth principle, take risks and embrace the consequences. This one is for those games where you don't get XP on a fail. No, I'm just joking. This was important, right? Because taking risks is cool. is not a principle where you're supposed to act like a chaotic neutral Daffy Duck character that just does whatever seems interesting at the moment. You take risks, it follows through with the other principles. You've got something to believe in. Be willing to take risks to achieve that thing you believe in. You're relatable. So these risks are things that we should pull for you to be successful at. Even if you succeed, it may not be the most optimum outcome, but we want to believe, because your character is relatable, that you would go for this. And we want it to be a thing where either way, pass or fail, is going to be interesting. And then embrace the consequences. What does that mean to you, Rach?
Embrace and accept when you get that 6-, because a failure now is just a setup for a 10+ later down the road. Or so I want to keep in my heart of hearts. Fail forward in interesting ways. Just because you've got a 6- doesn't mean you're just taking flat damage and that's the end of the story. The story is going to turn to react to you. And if you shut down because you failed, you're going to miss a bright new plot hook to grab hold of.
Yeah. And if the MC gives you a hard choice, hey, feel free to agonize over it for a moment or two. That's a little bit of the show too. And enjoy it, savor it, and make that decision. Embrace how bad it's going to be for you. But it'll only last for so long, right?
Exactly. So the next principle is help direct the spotlight among the group evenly. We workshop this one again too. It's obviously share the spotlight, but you should also work and help guide the spotlight. There could be a situation, or maybe you've noticed that another one of the players hasn't really done anything. You can help guide the spotlight by either suggesting in a character, hey, can we see what this character is doing? Or if you have the spotlight pretty brightly on you, you can make a choice to say, hey, I'm going to look for help from this other character because, yes, I could do it, but that's not interesting. Let's see what happens when I reach out and connect with that other PC. What happens to the story then?
Absolutely. Games where you have a solo moment, but you choose to bring another player in because they're either interestingly capable at what you need or possibly diametrically opposed, that's when a game starts to fire. Solo game where 4 people have to sit back and watch you do your thing, that can be good from moment to moment, but look at the rest of the group and see how you can integrate with them. Or, based on the actual game that you're playing, potentially conflict with them. Find ways to interpose yourself into their agenda if that's the kind of game that you guys are playing. Like a Monster Hearts, right?
Use your strings.
Exactly. Use your strings.
Use your debt in Urban Shadows. Be the faceless in Apocalypse World and use that hold you're saving on to show up at just the right time.
Oh, or possibly the worst time because you're a faceless. The last principle, which you would imagine would follow after help direct the spotlight among the group evenly, is but shine on when you have it. We loved it with Fellowship. I think it's something that should be shared among all of the family of Powered by the Apocalypse games. If you want to have a player agenda and principles, this is the great one to have. We talked about it pretty specifically earlier on. Is there anything more about shining on when you have the spotlight that you want to say, Rach?
No, it's you are one of the heroes of this story, so you better start acting like, well, even if you're not the hero, you're at least the protagonist. You're the person everyone is tuning in to see.
Exactly.
Be worthy of the audience's attention.
Well, that is it. Rach, we've solved it. We have created player agenda and principles.
You have no idea of the problem we've just unleashed onto the internet. No idea.
This is a thing that we workshop together. We did quite a bit of research into other games and tried to build something that was a bit of a consensus that could be universally applied to the majority of games we've experienced. I hope that you find value in it. And if you use this or if you read this and it inspires you, let us know. We're going to bring this to a close, but keep it in mind we have Google+, we have Twitter. There are a number of ways to get in contact with us. Even hop on to Gauntlet-RPG and give us feedback on this specific episode. Rach, thanks so much for coming together with me and sharing this with our listeners.
This has been a great project working on these agendas and principles. I'm really excited to see how the community embraces it and applies it to their own games.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.